Hi, everyone. Welcome to this new episode of our Student Spotlight series, where we are able to showcase some of the work our past students have done. I'm Charlotte, one of the outreach coordinators here at CCIR, and it's our pleasure today to have Arya with us, who did one of our one-on-one mentorship courses. So firstly, Arya, can you just introduce yourself? So tell us where you're from, what year you are in school, and then a little bit about the topic that you did in your course.
Hi, I'm Arya Du, and I currently live in Beijing, China. And I'm a senior at Beijing No. 80 High School. I'm really interested in history. In my CCIR project, I wrote a history essay with Dr. Alice Baldock, and my paper is basically about rethinking the Great Leap Forward in the 1950s in China from a microscopic historical approach.
And what interested you in looking into this topic?
Um, First, I'm just generally interested in the intersection between history, memory, and maybe political propaganda. So I began to look at and also how kind of natural environment intersected with human society. So I looked at some history books, which is generally about these topics, and some history that is about 20th century China. And when I looked at the history of the Great Leap Forward, I saw some really interesting descriptions and some short stories about, for example, in one case, like a lot of people under the pressure of the government kind of like they destroyed some of the religious temples around their villages to use that to build some, say, like irrigation constructions. And after this period of political frenzy ended, there began like some spooky stories began to circulate in that village about how like the gods wanted to punish the humans. So I thought this is really interesting because this stories and historical experience at the very bottom of the society, but it also illustrated how people experience political frenzy and how kind of their experience or their stories, although it's not very realistic, kind of reflect a period of kind of reflect something that feels really macroscopic and kind of give us insights into how culture and the environment interact. So this is how I began to think like I really want to do something that is about the very bottom down experience, the everyday experience about some kind of historical event and see how that kind of shed new light on our understanding of history.
That's so interesting. And it is very true that your kind of environment and all of these stories are so important to collect and share. And then so now let's just shift into talking about your specific research topic. So I know you mentioned it before, but can you just tell us again what the title of your paper was and then give us a general overview?
I think the title is basically Microhistory and Rethinking Oppression in rural China during the Great Leap Forward. And in my essay, I basically examined how people kind of understood the concept of oppression during this era by looking at some data of world history, some recordings of those who experienced the Great Leap Forward. And I kind of analyzed how their word traces, such as stealing and plucking, how that kind of demonstrated their understanding of legitimate and illegitimate behaviors, and also some like anecdote stories about Chairman Mao, his personality code, how that was circulated under a very kind of social context. And in the conclusion, I sort of concluded that people didn't get a full picture of how the policies were made, how like their Chairman Mao was back then, and that contributed to a system to kind of systematic, really institutional oppression and violence without anyone really realizing that they are being oppressed or oppressing other people.
And then for those that might not know, can you just give a brief overview of what the Great Leap Forward was?
Well, it's basically a period kind of categorized with political frenzy in the late 1950s to the early 1960s in China. And basically back then, a lot of villages were collectivized. So that being said, like a lot of village people were put together to do some field works, to do the farming and to build a lot of constructions, irrigation projects. And they were and one feature would be they were encouraged to build some backyard furnaces to produce steel, which was not of very good quality. So that induced very severe environmental consequences. And because of this system, the Great Famine was caused because a lot of grains were kind of extracted from each village to produce this kind of utopian vision that the country was very wealthy back then, to the kind of paint this picture that the country was very wealthy and everyone was very kind of happy under this communist rule. So I say like the basic elements would be a collectivized economy and politics, as well as this drastic change in environment or landscape.
Okay. And then can you walk us through what your research methods were and kind of your process of collecting data? Did you do primary data collection?
Well, actually, I used the database from Duke University. They have a collection of oral histories they recorded from different villages in China. So I just used their database and analyzed the content in it as my primary source.
And what kind of content were you collecting? Was it written interviews? Was it maybe diary entries? Walk us through kind of what it was and also how you searched for it, how you analyzed it.
Most of these, like all of these are videos, but because were people were speaking like these local I mean like this different region that they have different kind of version of Chinese, like the pronunciation was different. So I basically look at the transcript of these interviews. So that kind of gave me that made the information more precise, and I can look at how like there were pauses between different words.
Okay. And then to discuss your findings a little bit, can you just walk us through kind of what you found? Was there anything interesting that you weren't expecting to find?
Well, I think one thing I feel like which is really interesting would be that I in in the database of one village, I found out that like a lot of people were talking about this anecdote of Charimao, which is basically like the USSR and China had this deal that China would import a certain amount of crops or grains to USSR. And in the anecdote, which is like completely false, the USSR demanded they only wanted, say, like apples and chickens of certain sizes, and if the crops and the animals didn't fit that size, they would reject these. And after these crops were rejected, Chairman Mao wouldn't transport them back to China. He would just kind of dump these into the sea and the lakes. And this is uh this is a false anecdote, and it feels really surreal. And so, and I didn't see this version in any other villages. So I just started wondering, like, how can we see this in a social context within this social structure? So I analyzed how these people put these anecdotes in their conversations, and basically they would use this to justify the labor projects, the construction works they were involved in. However, there aren't any logics between these two things, because like the irrigation projects or other constructions were for infrastructure, and the Great Famine was caused by things relating to the crops. So basically you cannot use something about the crops to justify all the labor projects you were initiated into. So I feel like this is more of a story used to justify these sufferings these people were going through, and they were using the personality code as a more functional way, in opposed to what we might think as a really religious political frenzy, as that maybe in Nazi Germany. So I think this is a really interesting moment um in my in my research, because it kind of unpacked this concept of personality code, how it was kind of circulated in a really ground level in the village.
And then my last question about your specific research was there, or can you explain to us what you think the importance of your findings are to the field or to the general public?
Well, I think for one thing, microhistory and world history are relatively new history concept, and for one thing, I think it definitely kind of foster a new way of thinking, a new way of looking at the past, which is when we are looking at words such as oppression and maybe violence, it feels like these words are really direct and straightforward. However, you don't really know how that occurred, because sometimes it feels like the economy is in an oppression and people were lacking economic opportunities. But when does that kind of transform into oppression, whether people are aware of it? And I think based on my research, I would say like oppression and violence, they are not really transparent concepts for people in the past. And I think that is a really useful way of thinking at maybe contemporary issues and how you are kind of placed in a social network, which is kind of what our understanding of oppression or maybe violence in history propels us to think that we're not always kind of clear of what our influence within our network is. And it is definitely a nice thing and maybe a critical thing to do, to constantly reflect your place within the society. And I think my research kind of also illustrate the importance of restoring the past. By looking at each village, there are many nuances between the word choice, the language, or the anecdotes circulated. So like there are always opportunities of digging into the history and see the diversity of it.
I think those are great insights and an important thing for everyone to keep in mind. It sounds like an amazing project. So now we're going to just shift into discussing your general experience with CCIR. So firstly, can you tell us what your experience was like in the program doing a high-level research project like this as a high school student?
Well, I think the word research sounds a little bit intimidating, but I believe like the professor who guided me in my research, like she really kind of helped me to be winded into building up my research question and building up the skills required in historical research. For example, in the first few sessions, we look at the general question of history, memory, and maybe how microhistory evolved as a branch of history. And in these sessions, I did a lot of short essays a lot of short essays that are about, say, like summarizing a few different books, putting different journals together and see some general patterns in this research. And I think that really helped me to see how historians deal with these issues and how the theoretical structure theoretical structures can be combined with, say, case studies. So I think like to sum up my basic experience is, I think CCIR really provided me with the opportunity to kind of feel comfortable with finding my own research question, to build up my research process, and to see how to kind of learn from past experience and other scholars, to combine that with maybe a really amateur work of a high school student.
And then what was your experience like specifically in the one-on-one mentorship? So can you tell us kind of how your mentor helped you come up with the research question, what your course was scheduled like and everything like that?
Well, first, I think the schedule is physically like discussed. Like we discuss it and see what were our available times. So we set down the meeting times, and that was quite flexible. It kind of it sometimes change. And during the during the summer, I had some classes in the college, and we kind of paused for a few weeks. But after that, we resumed our meetings, and so I would say that was quite smooth out the process. And for each class, I think the experience is really nice in that we basically talk about the essays I did in my free time that was left by the last session, and we kind of crack it from sentence to sentence to see how that logic kind of sometimes is not self-explanatory, and I think that is really useful. And when looking at the research question, I remember like we're doing this kind of piecing together work, because in history you have these classic questions of, say, to what extent whether these are connected, or whether this attribute to this this problem. And after I wrote a basic kind of analysis of different scholars' opinion on the Great Leap Forward, we came up with a few themes, for example, environment, microhistory, or oppression, and we pieced them together. For example, how environment damage to the environment contributed to oppression, or how oppression changed people's attitude toward the natural environment. And I think that is really useful, that we kind of considered every possibility in a very academic setting. However, it was a very easy, very simple way to begin that kind of sifting process of what I should focus on in my research.
Nice. And then can you tell us what it was like taking such a niche course compared to most high school and even many undergraduate courses that are much more broad, like History 101 or Biology 101, for example? What was it like being able to really hone in on the topic that you're most interested in?
I think definitely I really liked the way it was taught, because every time when we're looking at what kind of books I should read, what kind of journal I should kind of explore, I think all the content is what I really want to pursue after. And I think for even some undergraduate classes, it can be either very general, it can be a really general topic, such as like European history or historiography, or something really specific like that of graduate level. However, for my research experience, I think I had this experience of narrowing down into my research question. For example, the end is analyzing these oral histories, analyzing the word choices and the sentences. However, the beginning of this process is by looking at how historians define the micro history and the world history, and maybe the middle range is how different Western scholars look at Great Leap Forward, what kind of problems do they have with it, what kind of errors they made. So this is quite a historiographical kind of approach, and maybe how the Great Leap Forward can be explained from an economic or political angle. And I think during the whole process, I really gained a deeper understanding in each aspect of my research in my research topic. So that is really useful for me as someone who is not very knowledgeable and experienced in history major.
Great. And then just a few more questions. Firstly, do you think this course has given you any insights into your future? Has it maybe informed or shaped how you think of your path moving forward at all?
Yeah, I think it definitely gave me a lot of insights into the future. Um, well, first, I think I really like the way of just researching history, like doing all this research, looking at the records, and I kind of also nailed down my interest of exploring social history and microhistory. And I also saw that I need more tools in analyzing environmental history. Maybe the tool such as look at maps or GIS or that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think it's definitely useful in revealing what my true interest lies in and what kind of new fields can I should explore in the future.
And then my last question for you, what advice would you give to someone who asked you what the value of doing a project or a program like this is, especially for a high school student?
Well, advice. I think for one thing, definitely be kind of bold about choosing your topic, because I think CCIR has, especially like for my for the researcher who guided me in my research process, they really have a nice way of kind of unpacking different problems, from looking at the general framework of this field to like looking at a very a specific branch of it. In my case, I didn't expect myself reading world histories or doing some really specific case studies in the end. So I think for many students, they should realize in a way like this is more advanced than most courses they may study in the high school, and they can like look at something that feels really interesting but maybe completely new for them when they start their research.
Great. I think that's great advice. So on that note, thank you so much for chatting to me, and congratulations again on your nomination to our Spotlight series.
Thanks.